Introduction to game production. What it means to be a game producer. Yeah, Liddy. No. Okay, so for this workshop, we're just going to talk about what it means to be a game producer, specifically in VGDC. But before we get started, these are things to prepare for the next meeting. If you are a team lead, highly recommend getting everyone's contact information. Make sure you add them to their server, and then right when you meet with your team, you want to establish your first meeting for the next week. This can also be done by the producer. You want to assess the team, ask them what's everyone's skill level. Maybe you can do that during the next meeting, but you want to know what you're working with. Get your team members talking, start discussion on your server. During my first game project here at VGDC, everyone started off with introductions on the server. And I also opened up a memes channel so we can judge everyone's taste in memes. And that helped us get closer as soon as possible. And when you're having a good time, productivity rises. Establish official meeting times and schedule, which we've already talked about, and consider a casual get-together. Because, like I said, when you're having a good time, you're going to be more productive. Oh, mic closer. Michael says mic closer. Mic closer. There you go. Alrighty. So, what's after this? Contact the project manager. Oh, who's the project manager? Anyone know? Irvine?
Oh.
Yeah. Kiara. Kiara's the project manager. Talk to me. If a member is unresponsive, I'll either give you their contact information or we'll consider replacing them completely. That's what the wait list is for. If someone ends up being MIA, thank God for the wait list. If you would like another member, if you're short on a programmer or you feel like you're getting behind schedule, I can do that for you as well. If there's a concerning team member, that can be either me or HR. We will help you with that. Or if in general you just need any advice, because I've been through some shit and I can know how to handle that, possibly. But yeah, so those are our pre-announcements before our workshop. So let's begin. What's a game producer? What is a game producer, friends? What do you think, Shryan?
A game producer is basically someone to keep everyone on track. It's like if you have like a bunch of programmers, a bunch of artists, you're really good at your own specific deals, but you're not very good at managing a project.
I see.
And you have this from experience.
Yeah. What's your name, friend?
My name is Joshua.
Hi, Josh. All right. What do you think a game producer is?
Well, some producers I know provide funding, but I know, because they provide funding, or even if they don't, they look through every aspect of the game's development, the programming, the art design, the music, the voice acting, and make sure it's how they like it. But they don't specialize in one of those areas specifically. That's like for that person's director or something. But they oversee everything and give their input.
That is exactly correct. The producer is typically the overseer, and they also make sure everyone's on task. How we make sure everyone's on task and how we make sure everyone is doing what they're supposed to be doing is a little strategy I like to call gentle persuasion. I'm tongue-tied, I apologize. Gentle persuasion! This is the accepted form of persuasion in VGDC. You have every right to... No, you don't actually. I'm just messing with you. A producer's main task is to keep everything organized. We'll have resources to be presented later. You have to make sure that the development of the game is on schedule and in scope. You want to make sure members are on task, and you want to make sure everyone is communicating. And by doing so, you think back on what you learned in middle school of pathos, logos, and ethos. Pathos is feeling, like connecting with your members emotionally. And when they know that you care, they'll think, oh man, this person cares about me, therefore I should consider what they're telling me to do because they have what I want in mind, right?
Yep.
Logos is what you know conceptually about the team. If they know that you're knowledgeable on how we can finish the project, then they'll trust you in that regard. And lastly, ethos, by portraying yourself as someone who's responsible, as someone who's organized, as someone who has their shit together, they'll think, yes, this is someone I can trust. Yes, their words and directions have value. Yes, this is the person I have to believe in if I want my project to succeed. So you have to display yourself as someone who is capable, and just in general make sure that you're a cool person. All right. So, why should you be a producer? Because people want producers. Okay, after their first project here at VGDC, people typically realize that being a producer takes a lot of time. Okay, after my first project here at VGDC, I realized I take 30 minutes out of every team meeting, getting my members, checking up on them, scheduling, scoping as needed. Granted, my first team here at VGDC was a little more than twice the acceptable size. And honestly, my team is the reason why we put a hard limit on team sizes, but we don't talk about that. But basically, producing, making sure everyone's on track, scheduling, scoping, it takes a lot of time, and it is very stressful. Which is why if you're a programmer and a producer, you realize that I don't have much time to program, or I don't have much time to write. It really takes back on time, which is why after people's first projects, they realize, hey man, I need a producer so I can focus on my own thing. Okay, so last quarter, we've had many projects looking for a producer. Even down here below, it said we had a VGDC project that fell apart because we had no producer. So having someone there to keep the reins on your team members is very helpful, because when everyone's just doing their own thing, no one's keeping an eye on it, we don't know what's going on, we don't know how to put everything together, we don't know how we are in terms of time to make sure we can complete our game project. The problem is, last quarter we only had 3 producers. Guess how many we have this quarter?
0.
You think 0? Anyone else? What do you think, Josh?
5.
You think 5? Ilana, you think 100?
What? I think it's how many producers?
Yeah, how many producers do you think we have this quarter?
Probably maybe like 5 or 6.
5 or 6?
I still say 3.
3? 3?
Wait, you already
Does the graph show it?
This is
That's
this is
from
last
last
quarter.
Oh, that's last quarter.
Yeah,
Oh.
this quarter. Okay, I'll give you a hint. We have 65 responses so far.
Out of the...
For
I'm thinking...
Oh, then
yeah.
2.
2.
Oh,
There we go. 2. We have 2 producers.
Producers.
We have 2
Are you
producers.
sure?
Are you
Oh.
sure?
Yeah.
Because one of the producer responses is mine.
As your primary role, then you're one of them.
Then
yeah.
you're in.
Then you're one of them. Yeah.
You're in all of it.
One producer.
Yeah.
You're in.
Yeah, so that's what we have so far. 2 producers. But I do expect a sudden surge of game signups tomorrow when it closes at midnight. But so far, right now, with 65 responses, we have 2, y'all. There's only one other department that has the same amount of...
That is artist.
No, actually, shockingly, it's not.
It's
It's
audio.
audio, yeah.
That's me.
So production and audio
Then
are
writers.
the smallest departments so far, with a grand total of 2.
And we're getting more artists.
Yeah, so
We're getting more artists,
Well,
though.
I mean, I'm pretty sure we are going to, but we have a 1-to-1 ratio. We're trying to keep it at a 1-to-1 ratio, so it depends on how many people sign up for LCAD. I won't get into that because this isn't what our workshop is about. So moving on. Oh, that's a stool. Well, you see, the stool is. This stool is.
That's my
Oh, that's
thing.
yours. I'm sorry.
Alright.
I was gonna talk about something I didn't know about.
Hi. Okay. So there was an image for production, but production kind of has 3 main cores of what to do for production. Also, hi stream. My name's Henry for things like that. I'm also a production officer. I'm Kira's underling.
Bob Champ in chat.
No.
All right. But yeah, a lot of production is kind of based down into 3 categories of management, communication, and scheduling. So let's kind of start off with the first one, scheduling. You are the team's parent. As a producer, you have to make sure you're scheduling meetings. You make sure that you are scheduling all the times and knowing when everyone is free so that you guys can plan accordingly for meetings and times. So set up your when-to-meet. Get that ready when your team assignments come in as producer. Make sure you know where all your when everyone's free. So when you have like in-person meetings, and also second place to meetings, do not have them on Discord. They are fine and they are good, but people will get distracted because of computers. So do them in person. You can if you do it in the quote unquote quiet lab, totally not the secret lab, but But there's a whiteboard there and other places, or you get papers and pencils and you kind of draw out designs together. It's honestly a much better time as a group meeting to have like visuals and actually draw these stuff out instead of having it over a Discord meeting, because a lot of people can quickly get distracted. So some good locations. So yeah, the game lab, as I said before, as well as the library. So make sure you reserve your times. And how often and for how long? Generally, a good rule is twice a week for around each meeting being around an hour to 2 hours. That means you're pretty much meeting for at max 4 hours a week. And honestly, people may say that's a lot of time, but we're starting things at week 2 on Friday, meaning we only really get 7 weeks of time to do game development, as well as 2 of those are taken out because of finals and midterms. So in reality, you get maybe 20 weeks for game dev, maybe. Right? I didn't math right. It's like
20?
Yeah.
20 weeks?
Or 20 hours.
Okay.
My bad. 20 hours for game dev. So make sure you take your meeting notes. Make sure you have all your stuff planned out and all that, all good and dandy. Okay?
Yeah.
Everyone is good? All right, cool. So next one, task management. Make sure you manage that timeline for that project, because holy jizoobles. What are people gonna do? What are we planning to do for your to-do list? How are you gonna know what to do if a producer doesn't have your things broken down for you? So you gotta know things like scope. You gotta know things like how to delegate those tasks properly and know where to so your entire team knows the direction of where your game is going. So use Trello, use Slack, use spreadsheets, game design documents, and planning. Whoa. So get that to-do list kind of all set up and make sure that's all accounted for, because trust me, having that kind of guideline for people to know what they're doing, and if they have free time, it's like, I can just go back and look at the Trello so I know what to do. It helps. Trust me. Get that Trello set up, get those things set up. And make sure the tasks at hand are not over-scoped for each individual team member. Tasks are super overwhelming, and you do want to be accounting for that time limit that you're having for those stuff, and consider the skills and things, and if they need help, try to help them if you can. That could be either talking with other officers around here in the game lab about this problem, or even going on the Unity documentation and trying to break it down to something simpler they can look at. Now, last one, team communication. Team communication is key. Talk to people, be engaging, be reachable, be transparent, be reliable. You have text messages, you have DMs and Discord. Make sure someone can talk to you about all this stuff, and make sure you can be open about it and respond relatively quickly. If they message you at 1 a.m. like I do, or 12 or past that, you don't have to answer when you're sleeping. I mean, you should sleep. But you should try to respond and try to be engaging. Everyone has a voice. Encourage them to use it to contribute. You should try to cut off, for game project wise, cut off designing by week 3 for contribute. But make sure everyone has their ideas. Make sure everyone is contributing to the process, and make sure everyone is knowing on the same pace. Make sure your teammates are always communicating with everyone, because your job as a producer is to make sure everyone communicates. Your goal, someone as a producer, is to somewhat kind of make your job obsolete sometimes, because if your team is producing and talking to each other and communicating and all doing well, then you're like, I'm gonna go get food for you guys. Let's do that. This is the dream. When I've literally had one team that had that, where they were all on focus during a game jam, and I was like, I'm gonna go to Pippin's and I'm gonna go pick up food and give them food to them, because they're doing well. I want to make sure they keep doing that. Yes, it is. They were all very focused and very well, so I wanted to shoot them out for that. So yeah, make sure everyone understands what they're doing and why. If you just tell them to make this thing and you have no reason for it, no one's really gonna care. So give the reason. Make sure everyone knows that reason for why this mechanic's being in place. And then develop a sense of camaraderie and establish an emotional bond within the project team. You know, we're all here in this together. We're all wanting to learn about how to make games. We're all doing this to be good people. Let's all try to be good, make good stuff. Yeah. And then lastly, be a constant learner. As a producer, you will know, like, you will not be the smartest person in the room. There will always be people who are better at something than you are. So ask questions, learn from your teammates. The more you understand the pipeline, the better you can make those informed decisions and kind of understand with your team better. And just like sit down with your team and talk with them and just like understand how this is working and what the frustrations are. So and then you are able to pick that up and put a pin into that later and maybe see if you can look at them to that. And then lastly is checking in on teammates. As the producer of your team, it is your responsibility to make sure people aren't slacking, but also that they're not overwhelmed. You know, checking on the teammates weekly is to ask them how your progress is going. Are you struggling with anything? And how can I make this better? If you met with members who are shrieking their duties, you gotta encourage them to contribute. It's important because people, if you're not willing to really be diligent on that and not willing to have the ethos in that sense of like, I'm here to make sure we're doing this and making sure it's proper. Like, you gotta have that diligence. You gotta be a little bit strict on that. But also, is if you have a problematic teammate, please talk to me or Kiara or Irvi or any other VGD officer about this problem, because that's if there are team members that kind of like whatever about it, we'll know. So just let us know though if you tell us and stuff like that. You're given this position to realize everyone's main goal: develop a competent game and make sure everyone on task is happy. So get that. Sorry, notification. And then lastly, big note. First, before we go there, actually, do you guys have any questions before I go into the big notes or anything like that, or any things that you're confused about? Yes.
What should you do if one of your teammates has a lot of work at week or whatever?
What type of work are we talking about? Schoolwork or okay, then they are here for school as a student. Make sure they're focused on their schoolwork because that is a priority for them. This is a extracurricular club. Realize that we should not make them prioritize their own game dev over their schoolwork, because that's why we're here for UCI.
See if another teammate can pick up the work for them. If not, then see if you can scope down.
Thanks, Irvi. But anything else? Any other questions and such of the concerns? No? Okay then. So then now the big notes. I guess that last kind of summarizing it all. Identify what the big and small stuff is. Same thing as task management. Be accountable in communication. Communication. Crunch for purpose. Who knows what crunch is? Let's go with Alana.
Well, I can explain.
Okay.
I believe crunch time is when you're very close to deadline, so you work very overtime in order to try to get it done as soon as possible, even though that makes you extremely exhausted and traumatic events and stuff. But
That is
but
true.
still, if it's necessary, the slide says, crunch for a purpose.
Exactly. Crunch for purpose. No one wants to crunch for a mechanic that could possibly be taken out later or something like that. Or people are in constant crunch like Rockstar Games or EA or other bad companies that kind of overwork their workers and then thus never make games again because they're so stressed. We want to crunch for, I'd say a good crunch day, a good example of a crunch is a game jam. You should have a 1 to 2 day time where you're making a game and spend a good 4 to 5 hours on the weekend kind of thing and say, hey, you guys want to have a crunch day and we all make sure we got all this cranked out by for implementation day. That helps out, and we can say what kind of mechanics everyone's on board with, and we get that done. And if we get that done early, it's good. If we don't, then that's fine. We got progress done by that crunch. So there has to be purpose for those crunches. If you have a crunch with no purpose and always pressure to make this stuff done, they'll get so stressed they may not ever want to do game dev again. So that's important to balance that out. Use crunch and use it responsibly. Lastly, the same thing. I talked about it before. Always ask questions in the development process and look at the problems that is slowing down development and how to fix that. I remember it from an extra credits video about the idea of you're looking into a dev cycle process and saying this is a problem for the artists and they're having difficulties. How can I solve that? And so you talk to the programmers and the programmers have a way to solve it. So they give like a couple minutes, and the timeline is like shorter for why. Yeah. And then be committed in the development process, but don't be involved. What does that mean? And there's an image of these stuff right here. You know, there's a difference between involvement and commitment. It's kind of the idea that you shouldn't like as a producer, you're more of like the overhead of the thing, where you're seeing the game is a bigger picture. If you're committed into the game project, you're gonna be seeing all these details and all these flaws and things like that you think are flaws. But as a producer, you're not really gonna see that stuff. You're gonna obviously as the overall game project and say, is this playable? Is this a minimal viable product? Is this able to be shipped? And is this in scope and stuff like that? Then we're good. So then we can get it shipped. Even though the programmers and artists and everyone else would feel like, there's all these problems, there's this, that, there's this, I'm so worried and things like that. Producer would be like, I think this looks fine. Don't worry about it. And thus we get that moving along. And yeah, for the best producers want to obsolete themselves. Reduce the urge to meddle. Don't think that like, oh, the thing's going good right now. Oh, everything's going fine. There's got to be something going wrong somewhere. And like, if it is communication's going well, try to maintain that good communication, make sure that stuff. But if there is a problem, solve those problems. If it's a communication problem, solve communication problem. If it is a workload problem, solve that. Just make sure that let them focus on making games. You have to make sure that they are being accommodated for that, essentially, by having the good locations and meeting workspaces to do so. And yeah, you're essentially, priorities, make sure it's communicated properly and effectively. All right, I think that's it. So I'm gonna pass this on to my big man Irvy. Irvy too big.
One last thing about crunch. You should definitely try to avoid it if you can, because to me, crunch usually only happens when something isn't really planned out too well. So definitely try to do your best to not let that happen, which ties into the whole topic of scoping. Now, what is scope? Anyone? Joshua.
It's basically how broad you think of how broad you think of your game to be. Like, for example, if you say, I want it to be this genre, then you have to say all the kinds of mechanics, and then 3D versus 2D, what kind of music. So all those kinds of complexities keep piling on, which increases the scope, which increases the time of production.
Right. So then I wouldn't say that it'd be broad then, because it does encompass every single thing that's going into your game, everything that the player is going to be experiencing. That is what scope is. And so, basic answer, it is your vision of the project and what you and your team are going to want to include into the game. All of the mechanics, all the art, all the audio, everything like that, all the systems. That is your scope for your project. And so with the VGDC, our club members like to very emphasize on making sure that your scope is as small as possible, because there's only so much that you can do within a quarter with 7 students who have busy school schedules, right? So whenever we look at game pitches, we want to make sure that these games have good scope. That, for example, like, I want to be able to make a game, a 2D side-scrolling platforming kind of game that has a simple inventory system and some basic enemy AI. That is an example of like a good scope, something that could be finished relatively within a single quarter. Now, I always run into people who come into the club who like might see us from like outside, and they come in and they talk about how they want to make a 3D open world RPG that has like crafting and it has like online co-op and things like that. And I will sit there and I'm just like, yeah, like I don't think that's a good idea, because like that is not feasible for many people in this club to accomplish within a quarter, unless you're like really, really insanely good and have a really dedicated team. What's up?
I was saying, could you explain to the stream why fighting games are bad scope?
Right, so the reason why fighting games are very are bad in scope is because in order to make a good fighting game, you have to have many different moves in which need to be balanced. They need to be animated, which requires a lot of art, which can be very intensive for a school setting. What's up, Jesse?
Or you could just get good.
Hey, how about you make the art for your game? That way it wouldn't be just stick figures.
Finished yesterday. Nice try.
Did you detail the art or was it
It's okay, Jesse's good.
Anyways.
Just pure wireframe, which is
Alright, guys,
fine.
come on.
Breaking all the rules.
So, why is scope important? Because it will literally make or break your game. And why is that? And that's because it follows this standard curve of motivation. What this basically means is, at the very start of the project, the team's motivation for the project will be at an all-time high. You know, everyone's ready. They're ready to hit the ground running. They're like, man, I'm gonna make the best game ever. But then midterms hit. Then all your assignments from all your school projects hit, and then eventually all these other responsibilities. You're just like, which diminishes your motivation more and more, and makes you feel like the amount of time that you can commit into the project be a lot less, and so like you won't be as motivated, and thus the only way to make sure that people stay motivated enough to complete the project is by making them feel like progress is being made towards the completion of it. And so you can't show this kind of progress if your scope is completely boggled by a bunch of different things, right? Because they're going to be completing certain tasks and they're still going to feel like they're nowhere near closer to actually completing this game. And so by keeping your scope down and being realistic as to sort of the things your team can achieve, will make sure that people will see that, okay, we're going to finish this. And towards the end, when they see like they're almost done with the game, that's when motivation will kick up a little bit to finish that final sprint. And so, like I said, you have to remember that, like, although it's good to be ambitious, you have to make sure that you're grounded and that you guys are just college students with 7 weeks. You're not being paid to do this, and you guys are nowhere near at the professional level. And so how do you do this? Is like I said, the best way to go about doing this is to make sure that the scope is adjusted to the sort of skill level of your team. If you guys are all beginners, then to make sure that your scope is small, that the features that you're incorporating are simple. If you guys are a little bit more advanced, then you can go and do more interesting or complex kind of things. But just to make sure that it's capable of being done within a relatively good time so that the project is done. And so, yeah. So, like I said, what's considered to be a sort of practical game? Well, a practical game is, like I said, something that can be completed within the amount of time allotted to you guys. So, since teams come out on Friday, that leaves you with relatively seven weeks to complete it. And so you want to make sure when you guys are designing your mechanics to first think small and think of like the core things that your game is going to incorporate. And then then once everything that's core to the game is completed, then you can start slowly introducing more things, because ultimately you just want to get a game out. And so ideas that are in scope for quarter-long teams with new programmers include 2D top-down sort of games with, like 2 to 4 levels, maybe simple enemy AI, side-scrolling games with a few, like 2 to 3 kinds of puzzles, or maybe a 3D FPS, which is actually, surprisingly enough, it's pretty simple if you keep it to a single map and with maybe 2 mechanics, like shooting or melee, things like that. And so how you gauge scope, like I said, it entirely depends on the skill set of your team. So in order to sort of gauge the scope of your project, you first, like we had mentioned before, gauge the skill level of each of your members. And like I said, so this is something you can ask at the beginning once you guys are together, but it's not something you can entirely just trust based on like what they say. You have to see their actions, see what they are actually capable of implementing, which might take a couple of weeks or so. You also want to make sure that you understand the sort of complexity of each programming or like each task to make a certain feature within the game. So like if someone is making like a crafting sort of system, you need to see, okay, what are all the sort of mechanics or like sort of tasks does this entail, and how difficult this is. And if you don't know how to answer that, then there are plenty of people in the club that can definitely help you answer those sort of questions. You also want to make sure that you're accounting for your schedule is flexible, and that you're accounting for things like midterms, for like holidays, because I know there's like a couple of holidays this quarter, things like that. And then finally, you definitely want to spend like the last remaining like weeks focusing on polish, because polish will make up essentially like 80% of like what the players will see. Like that's what's gonna make it all pretty and like nice to play and stuff like that. So you want to make sure that there is time for polish. And so I guess there's no slide. And so a good way to sort of start off with scope at the beginning of the quarter is to sit down with your teammates, and to, when you guys are designing your game, is to think about all of the tasks that are going to be needed to be accomplished in order to complete that game, and to sort of create like a project timeline in which you're listing out, okay, like this week we should have like this sort of milestone done this week, the next one this week maybe like for polish and things like that, and then like this week we should start wrapping things up, cleaning bugs, making sure things are all clean. Like although like your actual development cycle might not follow that timeline exactly, it's good to start off knowing what to expect, and that way you can see as to whether or not if we're on time or things like that. But yeah, but that wraps it up for scope, and that is the end of our workshop. Do any of you guys have any questions about anything at all?
Don't be No Man's Sky.
Yeah. See, the thing about No Man's Sky is that
getting better, isn't it?
no, it is
Yes.
better,
The game
because,
is better.
but
It is
it's
better.
taken a lot of time to get to.
It was just
that
at
level.
when they launched. It was just a bad launch. They had a really.
They had way too much hype
No
for a
promise.
very small indie team.
Yeah.
So like the things that they could reasonably do within that short amount of time, it was just completely unrealistic.
And they pulled out from it. They did it really
Yeah,
well. And
see,
it's
they
a
could
lot
have
better.
pulled a Bethesda, like Fallout 76, and just like not do anything to fix it to redeem themselves at all, but they did, and that's very respectable for
Yeah.
them, you know, because they could have taken the money that they had gotten for the initial sales and ran off, but they chose to fix it.
Internet historian.
Yeah.
Well, you define yourself by how you get out of your failures. You know, when you make a mistake, you show who you are by how you learn from your mistakes.
Exactly.
I
That's
think
what
we
matters.
have things to learn from No Man's Sky's producer.
Should we end this?
Probably,
All right.
Climb the lunch schedule well.
Okay.
Because in like project lunching, like and those kind of stuff are also should be included in your schedules. And you need to like figure out like when is like those lunching stuff, and when the project is supposed to be released, and when the project is supposed to be tested.
Exactly. Yeah. They released an unfinished game.
Yeah, because
Right.
even the president of Sony said they had they had a bad PR strategy.
Hey,
They
man,
did.
a ton of money,
Yeah.
So
but a lot of spite too.
I'm thinking. So first, I'm gonna
Not even
on my
the
list thing.
VGDC.